Okay. All right, so let's do this. My name is Zakaria Ul Ahmed Salim. I am an associate professor in the Department of Political Science here at Northwestern University, and I direct the Institute for the Study of Islamic Thought in Africa, ISITA. I want to welcome you all to this last talk of this academic year. We've organized 6 such talks that we called ISITA Dialogues. The idea is to discuss new books on Islam in Africa. And we're extremely excited to be welcoming Michelle Johnson to talk about her new book, Remaking Islam in Africa and Portugal, Lisbon, Mecca, Bissau, which is just out from Indiana University Press. Michelle is a professor of anthropology in the Department of Anthropology and Sociology at Bucknell University, and you've already heard that because you guys tuned in earlier than expected. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome and ask you to help me welcome Michelle Johnson to ISITA for her talk. She is going to have a PowerPoint presentation, and she has a title of her talk that she is going to spell out for you now. So thank you, Michelle, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Zakaria for inviting me to participate in this very exciting webinar. Thank you also to Rebecca and Kelly for their support with logistics and publicity. The website is just amazing. First time I think I ever wrote a blog. The title of my talk today is Mosques, Culture Clubs, and Embodied Ritual Debates, Remaking Islam in a New African Diaspora. I only wish that I could actually be there at Northwestern to give the talk in person at your just amazing institute rather than on Zoom. But I am thankful for the opportunity to gather in any modality for scholarly conversation during a global pandemic, right?
Right.
Okay, so as Zakaria said, my talk today is based on my book, which was published by Indiana University Press in 2020. The book is based on transnational, multi-temporal ethnographic fieldwork spanning 2 decades. I had 2 main goals for the book. First, I wanted to contribute to the study of Islam in local cultures. While we know much about this dynamic on the continent, we know considerably less about how it unfolds in the contemporary African diaspora, where the situation is even more complex and the stakes higher. Second, I wanted to contribute to the literature on religion and migration. Although many anthropologists today conduct research in transnational settings, their published works tend to focus more on political economy than on religion. So to my knowledge, my book is the first ethnography exploring the religious lives of Lusophone African immigrants in Europe. Because I'm speaking to, I'm assuming it's a diverse audience beyond my home discipline of anthropology, I want to first provide some background to the sites and the people who informed my research. I began working in Guinea-Bissau in the late 1990s, dividing my time between the capital city of Bissau and a Mandinga village in the north part of the country. And if you see the town of Farim right here, it's a village just about 45 minutes from there. Initially, I researched girls' initiation rituals and local views surrounding the global debate over female circumcision. But I later expanded my research to explore debates about ethnicity and proper Islamic practice centered on life course rituals more generally. So initiation was just one of those rituals that I look at. The civil war in Guinea-Bissau compelled me to move my project to Lisbon, where I began working in 1999 with members of the established Ghanaian Muslim immigrant community, as well as with refugees who were pouring into the city as a result of the civil war at that time. Since that time, I've completed follow-up fieldwork in both sites, most recently in Lisbon in 2017. Ghanaian Muslims in Lisbon are ethnically Mandinga and Fula peoples. In Guinea-Bissau, both groups belong to ethnic diasporas spanning multiple countries. The importance of diaspora for their identity is captured by the proverb, "We are all one," which is common in both the Mandinga and the Fula languages. Because their origins lie elsewhere, Muslims in Guinea-Bissau are considered strangers, even though they have lived in the country for centuries. They differentiate themselves from Guinea-Bissau's egalitarian coastal ethnic groups like the Manjaco or Pepel people, who practice indigenous African religions, Christianity, or both, and they identify with other socially stratified Mande and Fula peoples in the neighboring countries of Senegal, the Gambia, and Guinea, who live in the interior and who practice Islam. In Guinea-Bissau, Mandinga make their living primarily as subsistence farmers, and their Fula neighbors engage in mixed cattle herding and farming. I'll advance this slide here. Members of both groups also work as merchants, Quranic scholars, and healer diviners. Okay, I'm just going to show just to give you an idea of the village where I do my research. It's called Bafata Oyo in the northern Oyo region in Guinea-Bissau. Subsistence farming, the village mosque, some Quranic students there, and the spiritual leader Al-Hajj Fodimai Toure. Okay. Ghanaian Muslims began immigrating to Portugal in the mid-1980s. The Portuguese sociologist Luís Machado differentiated Muslims from earlier waves of immigrants in that most Muslims came to Lisbon directly from Guinea-Bissau's interior rather than from the capital city. As such, they remain rooted in ado, or custom, which they imagine as originating in the country's interior and representing the most authentic versions of their cultures. I argue that it is precisely this idea of custom that is being destabilized as Ghanaian Muslim immigrants remake Islam in African Portugal through ritual practices that I'll be discussing later in my talk. My fieldwork in Lisbon involved constant movement between centers of Ghanaian Muslim immigrant community life, such as public squares, restaurants, mosques, and culture clubs, and people's private homes, workspaces, and life course rituals that united members of the dispersed Ghanaian Muslim community. Although participant observation was my most important research method, I also conducted interviews and life histories with selected research participants. The Ghanaian Muslim men I worked with in Lisbon earned their living primarily as construction workers, tailors, or street merchants who sell things from the homeland, such as cola nuts, local tobacco, and fruits and vegetables, to fellow immigrants. Others were healer diviners, whom I'll speak about more soon. And a lot of the women I worked with worked in local restaurants as well, and sold things from the homeland on the streets of Lisbon. And I am going to show you a few photographs from there. These are just some of the neighborhoods that I worked in Lisbon, which are primarily settled by African immigrants. The sellers at Rocio Square in downtown Lisbon. African immigrants gathered in the background there. In central Lisbon, Taylor in one of the exurbs where I work, and the Central Mosque. Okay. In Lisbon, mosques and culture clubs are two principal cultural sites that Ghanaian Muslims frequent and imagine themselves in relation or opposition to in Lisbon. Lisbon's Central Mosque was inaugurated in 1985 and is the focal point for the city's multicultural Muslim community. Ghanaian Muslims, especially men, took pride in the mosque's size and prominent location in the city, and often invoked it when addressing Lisbon's expanding Muslim population and increased anti-Islamic sentiment in the city. If you go to church on a Sunday morning, you'll find it empty, people told me. But if you go to the mosque on Friday, you'll see more people there than you can count. Many Ghanaians in Lisbon regularly attended Friday prayer and Muslim holiday celebrations at the mosque. But whether one prayed there or not, the mosque held significant symbolic importance for Ghanaian Muslims and was a principal force shaping their daily lives and identities. Community members gathered there to catch up on the latest news or gossip, to find out who had left for Guinea-Bissau and who had just returned, and to engage in commerce. On Fridays, Ghanaian merchants transformed the space outside into an open-air market where vendors sold things from the homeland, as well as Muslim religious paraphernalia, such as prayer beads, headscarves, and wall hangings of the Kaaba. Many Ghanaian Muslims, however, were acutely aware of their minority status at the mosque. During my early fieldwork, Muslims from the Middle East and South Asia dominated the mosque and held positions of power there. For Ghanaian Muslim men, the mosque's multiculturalism was central to its appeal. The presence of Arabs and Indians, as my interlocutors called them, highlighted their own participation in the Ummah, the global community of Muslims. It engaged their imagination and represented a direction in which they desired to turn in their own faith and identity. In short, the mosque made them feel like cosmopolitan Muslims. But Ghanaian women, especially those with little formal Quranic education or knowledge of Arabic, felt excluded from the central mosque. They were intimidated by Arab and Indian Muslims whose cosmopolitan religious sensibilities seemed beyond their immediate reach. Women told me that on Fridays and Muslim holy days, Arab or Indian Muslims harassed them at the door or even refused them entry to the mosque. One Fula woman told me, "The Indians think they own the mosque. They stand at the entrance, and if they don't recognize you, they'll stop you and ask for identification. If you're an African woman, you'll surely be asked." Once an Indian man demanded to see my proof of conversion to Islam. I told him that my ancestors converted to Islam centuries ago and that they didn't keep records back then. He told me to recite the Al-Fatiha instead. I was so angry that I forgot the words. Encounters like this intensified women's insecurity regarding the formal aspects of their religious practice. Ghanaian Muslim women study the Quran less intensely than their male counterparts, and their responsibilities as wives and mothers left them with less time to devote to prayer, Quranic study, and pilgrimage. Women's ability to frequent the mosque was also complicated by the fact that navigating the city's transportation system demanded map reading abilities, proficiency in Portuguese, and money. Many women told me that they would go to mosque if only they could be driven there, but they rarely got rides over men. Keep it there. In response to these feelings of exclusion, Ghanaian women created the Culture Club, an alternative space in which they could fashion their own version of cosmopolitan Islam. At the time of my fieldwork, there were several clubs in Lisbon, including the Sabunima, or Sweetness Club, the Gente Rica, or Rich People Club, and the one I came to know best and even eventually joined, the Bading Clubo, or the Maternal Kin Club, Lisbon's first and largest culture club. Tumbolo, the club's mother, told me that she and 3 other women founded the club in 1989 so that Mandinga immigrant women could form a community in Lisbon. We were all in a foreign land, she explained, so we needed to find a way to live together as we did back home. In addition to its social dimension, the Maternal Kin Club, like Lisbon's other culture clubs, acted as a rotating credit association, providing funds to assist Mandinga immigrant women in starting a business, returning home to attend a funeral, or helping members make the Hajj. The word Badim in the club's name underscores the quintessential Mande cultural theme of maternal kinship. Specifically, it refers to milk kin, or siblings who share a mother. As Bird and Kendall argued, maternal kinship for Mande peoples is a powerful symbol of oneness, of equality, loyalty, and affection, in contrast to paternal kinship, which fosters difference and competition. As Tumbolo put it, club members are all the same, all equal, because the club is like a breast from which we all nurse. Members took pride in the club's Muslim character, which they understood more in cultural rather than religious terms. Only members of Muslim ethnic groups could join the club, and alcohol and pork were taboo. Events were organized primarily around life course rituals, such as name-giving rituals, weddings, and funerals, as well as Muslim holiday celebrations, such as Tabaski and the Prophet's birthday. Finally, it sponsored secular cultural events, including African fashion shows and music concerts. People celebrated at large because, as they put it, this is Europe. Events were held in enormous rented ballrooms in central Lisbon. Women changed into 3 or 4 different outfits in a single evening and cooked elaborate traditional dishes in portion sizes that were practically unheard of in Guinea-Bissau. In short, the club created what Barbara Metcalfe called an alternative Muslim space, a vernacular cosmopolitanism that rivaled the central mosque. In the culture club, ethnicity and Islamic piety coexisted rather than conflicted, and women could be simultaneously Mandinga or Fula and Muslim in ways they found most meaningful. I suggest that the mosque and the culture club are not mutually exclusive cultural spaces, however, but rather mutually constitutive and overlapping ones, with which or against Ghanaian Muslims move as they remake themselves, their religion, and their ritual practices in Portugal. During follow-up fieldwork, I learned that members of the Ghanaian Muslim community established a third space, a mosque at Rocio Square in central Lisbon. The mosque, which was more like a prayer space, was located in the basement of a Fula-owned shop and was created to serve Rocio's Ghanaian Muslim merchants who needed a convenient place to pray during their long workdays. Unlike the central mosque, which was frequented by Muslims from throughout the Muslim world, only West African Muslims prayed at the Rocio Mosque. While most of the culture clubs comprised members from a single ethnic group, the Rocio Mosque was multi-ethnic. Fula, Mandinga, and Biafado Muslims prayed together, and not all of them were even from Guinea-Bissau. Muslims from Guinea-Conakry, the Gambia, and Senegal who owned or worked in African shops and restaurants at Rocio also frequented it. Indeed, the Rocio Mosque signaled the emergence of a regional diasporic, that is, a Senegambian Muslim identity in African Lisbon. Okay. All right, I want to move now in the talk to talk about some embodied ritual debates. And this is going to be a shortened version because in the book, each one of these debates focused on ritual practices comprises an entire chapter. So this is just the short version so we can make sure to leave lots of time for discussion. When Ghanaian Muslims leave their homeland and make their way in the land of their former colonizer, they encounter new versions of Islam and a novel approach to religion more generally. In Guinea-Bissau, Mandinga have conflated ethnicity and Islam for centuries. To be Mandinga is to naturally be Muslim. More specifically, Muslim identity means being born to Muslim parents, possessing a Muslim name, and experiencing three rituals: the name-giving ritual, the writing on the hand ritual, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and circumcision for both boys and girls. But as they come into increased contact with Muslims beyond Africa and encounter other ways of being Muslim, they are coming to see these identities as distinct and to separate ethnic traditions from Muslim ones. In Lisbon, this heightened awareness has intensified, inspiring a broader shift in how Ghanaian Muslims understand religion, not as an ascribed embodied identity, but as a conscious choice, even an achievement. In African Lisbon, this process is sparking debates focused on customary aspects of life course rituals and other ritual practices. Many claim, for example, that the rituals that they have long practiced are African customs that should be revised or replaced altogether by a more cosmopolitan practice of Islam, focused on Arabic literacy, Quranic study, and the 5 pillars of faith. So at this point, I'll present 2 short examples that I discuss in the book: the writing on the hand ritual and Muslim healing divining. The writing on the hand ritual is performed when Ghanaian Muslim children turn 7 years old. During the ritual, a holy man dips a fountain pen into black ink and writes the opening verse of the Quran on the child's palm. He then adds a pinch of salt to the ink, which the child then licks with 3 strokes of the tongue. Next, the holy man points to each letter of the Arabic alphabet, written on a wooden slate used in village Quranic schools. He utters the name of each letter out loud and instructs the child to repeat it. Relatives and friends join in the recitation and present offerings of money and kola nuts. Finally, women distribute munko, pounded sweetened rice flour, and everyone celebrates by sharing a meal. So this is a photograph of one of these rituals, and the kola nuts, which you all might recognize. The writing on the hand ritual initiates children into Quranic study. As one woman put it, when Europeans enroll their children in school, they write on papers. We write on our children's hands. Specifically, the ritual prepares children for Quranic study by opening the mind, cooling the heart, and steadying the spirit. Although the Quranic verses written on a child's palm gradually fade and eventually disappear altogether, they are said to remain forever visible to angels who begin a lifelong relationship with children, recording their actions and intentions, both good and bad, and reporting them to God on Judgment Day. Ibrahim, a Muslim healer diviner in Lisbon, considered the writing on the hand ritual an obligatory rite, essential for socializing Mandinga children into their own indigenous educational system. It highlighted, for example, the importance of respect for elders and the necessity of suffering for the pursuit of knowledge. For example, the arduous memorization of Quranic verses. It emphasizes the continued importance of the ritual. He emphasized rather, or in emphasizing the continued importance of the ritual in Lisbon, Ibrahim removed his passport from his front shirt pocket and said to me, "You need a passport to travel, don't you?" Well, the writing on the hand ritual is a Muslim child's passport to the afterlife. Bakar, another healer diviner in Lisbon, disagreed. He claimed that Mandinga elders invented the writing on the hand ritual long ago as a form of Muslim propaganda in Africa to encourage children to study the Quran and fill them with pride in their religion. But in Bakar's view, the ritual is an African custom, not a Muslim one. The writing on the hand ritual isn't in the Quran, he explained to me. The angel Gabriel taught the prophet to read, but he never wrote on the prophet's hand. Bakar continued that the writing on the hand ritual, like other Mandinga life course rituals in Lisbon, is simply a way in which Mandinga immigrants can build their name in the wider community, displaying their fame, financial success, and false allegiance to Islam. Later in our conversation, however, Bakar revealed a secret importance of the ritual in Lisbon. It is said to protect children from experimenting with alcohol. Even a sip of alcohol subsequent to the ritual, people explained, could lead to insanity. But in the end, Bakar believed that refusing to drink alcohol should reflect a deep allegiance to Islam rather than a fear created magically through an African ritual of losing one's mind. He explained, "It's up to parents, not a ritual, to prepare their children for Quranic study and prevent them from falling from Islam in Portugal." All right, I'm going to switch now to the second ritual, which is Muslim healing divining. Ghanaian Muslims consider healing divining one of the noblest of professions, equal to that of farmers, warriors, and traders. Healer diviners are said to be close to God and to mediate between human beings, God, and non-human agents, such as spirits and angels. A person can become a healer diviner in three ways. First, he may inherit the knowledge and skills of the trade. Second, he may apprentice with a renowned healer over many years. And finally, in what Al-Magatli termed a sacrifice of identity, he may offer a child or his wife's fertility to a spirit in exchange for the necessary knowledge and power. Although my interlocutors in Lisbon deplored this latter strategy, they told me that some shameless people, unfortunately, resort to it occasionally. Muslim healer diviners perform two important roles. As teacher scholars, they operate Quranic schools where they instruct students in Arabic literacy, Islamic doctrine, and ritual practices. They also train the next generation of healer diviners in the deep secrets of the Quran and see clients for a variety of problems or pursuits, including barrenness, success in business, a cheating spouse, drug and alcohol addictions, or securing residence papers to stay in Lisbon. Healer diviners blend a variety of techniques in their treatments, including the manipulation of God's names and of Quranic verses, numerology and astrology, and medical knowledge of plants and animals. In divining the source of a client's misfortune and the most successful treatment, they use cowrie shells, sand, the Quran, kola nuts, prayer beads, and dream divination. They provide clients with three kinds of medicines: leather-cased amulets into which Quranic verses are sewn, which are worn on the body or tied to objects; liquid medicine, which consists of water into which Quranic verses are dissolved. People either drink this medicine or wash their bodies with it. And finally, the transmission of blessings, dua, through a healer diviner's breath or spittle, which clients then rub into their face, head, and hands. In introducing me to the world of Muslim healing divining in Lisbon, Master S told me that surviving in Europe meant abandoning some techniques and adopting others to meet the demands of two disparate groups: nostalgic African clients who seek authentic healer diviners who can reproduce affordable treatments from back home, and high-paying Portuguese clients who have a different set of expectations about the power and capacities of seers, as they call them. In responding to this challenge, many healer diviners in Lisbon call themselves astrologers, great scientists, or masters, and take out ads in local newspapers or magazines. And when in Lisbon and even in southern Portugal, one can see these ads all over small cities or Lisbon. Getting Portuguese clients isn't easy, Master B told me, as he proudly showed me a stack of pictures of his white clients. The key to attracting them, he explained, is flexibility. For example, adding tarot cards and tea leaves to one's repertoire of traditional divination methods. Unlike African clients who usually approach a healer diviner with a specific problem or request, Portuguese clients believe that as seers, healer diviners should already know the reason for their clients' visits and should not have to be told. As Master B explained, I don't need people to tell me their problems because I know the stars. They tell me why my clients have come. But Master D, an older healer who practiced most of his life in Lisbon, or in Bissau rather, before coming to Portugal, was critical of his younger colleagues' new approaches, deeming them un-Islamic. How can I know a client's problems before they tell them to me, he exclaimed. I'm just a healer diviner, I'm not God. Master D accused those younger healers who adopted techniques of the infidels, as he put it, such as divination with tea leaves and tarot cards, of spoiling the reputation of those other healer diviners in Lisbon who remained loyal to their traditional craft. Perhaps most dramatically, healer diviners in Lisbon were divided on how to handle requests by Portuguese clients to use their knowledge and power to kill someone, usually a boss, a spouse, or an in-law. Some healer diviners felt strongly that using their powers to destroy human life is contrary to Islam, since true Muslims believe that only a God can take a life. Others, however, especially those who took out ads in local newspapers and employed not so traditional methods, emphasized the need to serve their clients, however amoral or un-Islamic their requests might be. In their view, all Muslim healers have the God-given power to build or to destroy. If these powers are both explained in the Quran, Master X told me, then how can they be un-Islamic? So just to finish up with the slides here, this is a leather worker in central Lisbon who actually receives the medicines from healer diviners, and he sews them into leather-cased amulets. And there's one of the healer diviners who I opened up with. Okay. So I'm pretty much right at time. I was going to sort of recap some main points, but I'm tempted to actually stop there and open it up for discussion. Discussion is always the most fun part.
Thank you so very much, Michelle, for this wonderful presentation. There are so many themes, and the way we usually do the Q&A is when people raise their hand, we give them the floor. But my experience is that I missed some raised hands in the past. So, so I need some help there, but I already see Professor Falun Gong has already raised his hand. He want to ask a question. Great.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I'm from Ziguinchor.
Wow. Okay.
Ntapapia Drito Criollo.
Yo. Ntapapia Drito.
Ntapapia Drito. So I grew up between Casamance and Guinea-Bissau.
Yo.
And I was in Farin last summer.
Wow, amazing.
So this resonates with me. My question is about the Fula that you were talking about. Are they the Fula Kunda, or are they the Fula from the Gabu region, who are originally, whose roots could be traced to Guinea-Conakry? So which Fula is it? Is it the Fula that we find in the Bafata, in the border with Senegal and Kolda region, the Fula Kunda? Or is it the Fula communities in, the Fouta Djallon, really, originally from Guinea? The second question is on the moral, the issues that you've talked about, the healing and the educational dimensions of the Quranic letters is discussed by Benjamin Suarez, talked about, of course, the the spiritual economy and the moral economy. So I was wondering, what does your work add to that conversation?
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you so much for those questions. So first of all, so for the Fula, you know, in Lisbon, I would say it's a mix. I mean, in Guinea-Bissau, obviously, when I'm in, you know, the that northern Oyo region, I mean, they're, you know, Fula from Gabu. In Lisbon, however, it's much more of a sort of Fula diaspora, right? So the people I don't really work. I mean, I have a few Fula families who I visit and work with, but I have really focused on Mandinga people. The book really is mostly Mandinga people, simply because of language. I mean, I don't speak Fula, and you know, I can speak Mandinga and Creole, right? So, but in Lisbon, you have a broader range of those. In fact, there's even an organization, a Fula culture club that's dedicated to Fula from Guinea-Conakry. So it's become a much wider kind of diaspora of Fula people, and they really dominate now. I mean, it was amazing. In 2017, when I was in Lisbon, there are several Fula mosques that have creeped up now that have been created in Lisbon in some of the diaspora areas, really run by Fula from both Guinea-Bissau and Guinea-Conakry. So, and I do have in my Quranic master, my Quranic teacher in Lisbon is actually from Kolda. So there are Senegalese as well too, right? But most of those Senegalese are, you know, in Paris, right? They go to migrate to France or whatnot. So anyway, that's the first part of the question. But the second part of the question is a little trickier. You know, I mean, there's such a diverse and incredibly rich literature, right, on all of these, the people I'm talking about and all of these practices, right? In fact, I remember the biggest challenge of really writing the book was like, you know, what can you really add to what's been done, right, on all of this stuff? And I think that I brought, or tried at least, attempted to bring two, you know, I won't call them new things, but a little bit of a different perspective, right, on comparing to Suarez's work, for example, and others. Robert Launay, I was really hoping Robert Launay would be in the audience today, because his work has been very influential for me as well. But I really tried to keep my focus on these healers and the ritual debates that were happening very person-centric, right? So I've been working for 20 years following these people in Lisbon for that entire time, right? You know, moving with them through the life course and watching their practices as they grow and change and evolve, and really allowing them to tell their stories in the book, right? So I have a lot of narratives. I tried to do my best to highlight some of that today, right? With people speaking in their own words. Very focused on how these practices are allowing them or inspiring them to remake themselves, both as ethnic, right, members of ethnic groups, so Fula and Mandinga, and here I'll really speak for Mandinga, right, because I worked much less with Fula people, and we need to do a lot more work to speak for them, right, but how they're remaking themselves as ethnic people, but also as members of the Ummah, right? And so this, I think, what's different is that I'm taking this long kind of rich debate that we have on the continent of Africa, like, look, this is what's happening in Mali and in Senegal and whatnot, Senegambian region, but how is this taking on a new meaning, a transformed meaning? And I would argue a really renowned importance, right, in diaspora context. And I have to say, we don't have a lot of work that's been done on that. I mean, like I said earlier in the talk, a lot of anthropologists, and I'm speaking now, you know, mostly for anthropologists, when they move their work from the homeland to a host country and begin working with the diaspora population, their work, interestingly, becomes much more politically, economically focused, right? And I know, as someone who did make that shift, a lot of that is just logistics. You know, it's hard to access people the way that you can in a little village in northern Guinea-Bissau than in a capital city when people are moving. And you know, I have an entire chapter in my methods section in which a cell phone, like getting a cell phone in 1999, you know, before anyone in the United States really had one, was a huge thing that I had to argue for my Fulbright. Like, I need this to do the research because this is how people are communicating. So how are people using those new media images? In the book, I also talk a lot about media images and how these, especially ones focused on the global debate about female circumcision, how are these intersecting with anti-Islamic sentiment that's on the rise in Europe right now, with racism and you know, these sorts of encounters, right? So I think it does take this debate that we have on the continent and shows its contours and how it's remaking people and their lives and their religious practices, right? So focused on religion, right, in the diaspora. So that's how I think if I answered your question, that's my take on that anyway.
Thank you so much. We have two questions in the chat. Can you see them?
Oh, sure. Let me see.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at talking at the same time that I'm reading the chat.
I can read them to you if you want.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
Okay, so first question is from Tim White. Does the Suwarian tradition and or Sufi tariqas contribute to shaping diasporic Islamic practices in Lisbon, especially as counterbalances to Fula or Mandinga cultural clubs? Yeah. So that's the first question. You want to answer that one, and then we'll move
Yes, I would love to.
Yes,
this is a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. And you know, what's so interesting about this is, you know, I went looking, I was, you know, as a graduate student studying about Islam and Africa and all of these, you know, different groups, you know, Sufi and, you know, all of these different groups, thinking, wow, I wonder what the people I work with how are they going to define themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And what was so interesting about this is that there was an absence, you know, almost a reluctance to name oneself as we are Sufis, right? The first thought I got was that people, well, we're you know, Sunni Islams, you know, Muslims. Most of the people in this area are. But at the same time, I had these Baifal, and Fula will probably know who I'm talking about, these Baifal Muslims from Senegal coming to the village, right? And doing these incredible, you know, Sufi practices, right? Of beating themselves with giant clubs. And then they would say, here, try to lift this club. And I would lift it and I could not even lift. I mean, the club was so heavy, and they're beating themselves with these clubs and, you know, and I mean, incredible practices. And I thought, wow, I mean, you know, are these, you know, who am I dealing with here, right? They followed Alhaj Fodi Mai Toure, who, you know, has unfortunately died in 2008. But there's still a whole following in the village of Bafata Oyo, you know, dedicated to him, where on the Prophet's birthday or Gamo, you know, everyone gathers and we're all, you know, people wear these pins with his face on it, right? Amadou Bamba, right, is a huge figure in this area too. So, I mean, I can sing all these praise songs to Amadou Bamba. Was one of the first things I learned in Mandinka, right? You know, there is a real mixture, I think, going on of all of these different groups that people experience, right, have direct experience with. Yet I don't want to say a reluctance, because that seems deliberate, but a lack of actually identifying with one or another of them, right? So, you know, and this is something I discuss in the book as well. It's, you know, a group of people who are, you know, these debates are happening, people are arguing about proper Islam, but they don't necessarily have words or you know, terms, right, for these various groups. It's a very loosely structured debate, which for me, I thought was so intriguing, although sometimes I admit I was jealous of some of these scholars, you know, in their books who got to sort of say, you know, it was this group who came in, you know, the reformists, this. I mean, I really argue in my book that the debates that are happening transcend, right, traditionalist, reformists, Sunni, Sufi. any of these binaries that especially, foreign anthropologists are always dealing with in their works, right? So that would be my response to that really, wonderful question.
So there is another, thank you. There's another question about how gender sensitive is the diasporic mosque in Lisbon. You already talked about this with regard to African women, but I think this is a broader question about women in general in the mosque in Lisbon. How that mosque is gender sensitive. This is how I understand the question. The second part of the question is, why do you think Arab and Indian Muslims subject African Muslim women to hectic screening of their Muslimness before they allow them access to the mosque? And I want to add something to that question. Did you do any research with non-African Muslims in Lisbon in order to gauge their own understanding of African Islam or their own gaze on African Muslims in Lisbon?
Wow, these are great. Wonderful questions. Okay, so the first one is gender, and I don't know if I'm hearing this one correctly, but is it about the central mosque in Lisbon or the Rocio? Yes. Oh, the central mosque. Okay, good. Okay, well, I'll tell you one thing, right? I began my research in 1999, and have been going back every few years. And in 2017, I saw, and this was literally, I was finishing the book, and I needed a few, newer photographs that I wanted to put in the epilogue to the book. And so I went for a pretty specific purpose. And I was hanging out with the cola sellers at Rocio, who I've known for years, and then met some new people as well. And they said, oh, Fatoumata, let's go to the mosque. So we jump in a taxi and we go to the central mosque. And I was first of all shocked, like, wow, why are we going to the central mosque when the Rocio mosque is right here? And I was shocked by what I saw, right? Which then I dedicated the entire epilogue of the book to this. But the Lisbon mosque in 2017, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, when you work in a place for so long, you see ebbs and flows and changes over time that I have seen, right? And in 2017, when I followed these women to the mosque, first of all, I was nervous. Are they going to let me in? Okay, because for many of the years that I worked, I would follow my informants there, and as a non-practicing Muslim myself, I would set some boundaries, right? Boundaries that weren't really relevant for me to set in Guinea-Bissau, where I just kind of went and prayed with people and everything. But in Lisbon, it was a little bit more formal, right? And so I would sort of stay outside, or they would follow them in, and I would sit out on a couch while they went in and prayed. And this time they said, oh no, Fatoumata, you're coming right in with us. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was thinking, what are the Indians and Muslims going to do with me? And they just let me in. And I'm in the mosque sitting there, and women are selling things in the mosque. And I'm looking around, remembering what the mosque was like the last time I was there, which at that point was maybe a good 5 or 6 years. And I see predominantly African Muslims who I recognize and know from all of the culture clubs and life course rituals and stuff all over Lisbon. So these were primarily, African Muslims. And I turned to one of the women and I said, well, where are all the Indians and Arabs? Or using their, in Creole, Indianos and Árabes, right? Where are these people? And they said to me, oh, they've left, they've all formed their own mosques. Okay, so literally there was this just bifurcation of this big central community that was so prevalent in the late 1990s through the 2010. And then this bifurcation of all these opening of these new mosques, right? So they said, the Indians and the Arabs have left, and the mosque is ours. We've taken over the place. That's literally what we've taken over the place, and it's ours, and you're invited, Fatoumata, come and pray with us, right? So it was a really big difference. Okay, so if I were to think back then, this is the second part so I guess gender has gotten better. More of the women who I worked with, in 2017 were going to the mosque, but there were still a lot of women who weren't. So it wasn't that everything had changed so much that my argument was no longer a thing, right? Still, a lot of women chose not to go to the mosque. They had the same kind of constraints about transportation and money and being worried that they were going to get lost, right, making their way there. But the whole feeling of feeling like second-class citizens. So I guess I'm addressing now the second part of the question, that I think a lot of it, you know, dare I say, was, you know, a kind of racist, you know, encounter of like, well, you're Black, you're not a good enough Muslim to worship here. And, you know, I have stories after stories from my Black African Muslims talking about how they feel, you know, vis-a-vis that community of, you know, the broader group of especially Saudi Muslims. So I think I would have to say that. Now, the last part of the question is just such an important, you know, incredible question that no, I have not had the opportunity to work with that group. And I think that, you know, it's something that I've thought about and I've wanted to do and imagined how, you know, how awesome that would be, right? And if I would even have the language abilities to do that, I mean, I'm sure some of these, you know, most of them probably speak Portuguese and that would be great, right? And I could do that, but that would be an interesting perspective, right? To say, you know, how, you know, what do you think? And I don't, you know, I don't know. I haven't done that. And I think it would be really, really interesting. It would make for a fascinating study, an article or anything, but that's something I didn't do. I think I really had my hands full. Honestly, traveling, you know, from all of the households, you know, from central Lisbon to all of the exurbs, you know, 12-hour long research days, and then into the night if someone died and I got a call on my cell phone, you know, we're having a samula, this, you know, ceremony for a person who just died, you know, come. So it was like 24/7 kind of field work. I just never, you know, was able to do that, right? But I think it would be a really fascinating angle to add, would add a complexity that would just be amazing. So thank you.
Absolutely. I think this will be interesting. So we have a raised hand now by Brian Maxie. I hope I pronounced that right. Brian?
Hi, Brian.
Okay.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, for the location, I'm outside. Just wanted to say thank you very much for the rich talk and the conversation so far. I was able to read the book, so even though I know it came out recently, a PhD student, it's a great book. Yeah, so it was a great read, and that's a part of my question is your writing style. I was reading in your book how you decided to take a more ethnographic, person-centered writing style, so I wanted to kind of just hear a bit more about that as far as an approach to writing. And then the other question was regarding how you talked about, in your talk and in the book, the differences between the way your interlocutors describe true Islam versus African custom, which I found really interesting. And I was curious about how did your interlocutors in Guinea-Bissau, in the village itself, view Al-Hajj Fodimai himself as a Haji. He clearly had interactions that were cosmopolitan. So what was their idea of cosmopolitanism beyond the borders of Guinea-Bissau or the village, as opposed to what you saw in Lisbon? So that was the part I was still trying to figure out in the book. That was when I saw you were going to give the talk, I was like, I'll have to ask her. So thank you and for the rich talk, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for the brilliant questions, boy, by someone who's read the book, right? Which is really amazing. So thank you, my gosh. So yeah, the writing, you know, it was amazing. You know, when my dissertation was focused, you know, it was the opposite. It was sort of focused primarily on Guinea-Bissau with bits and pieces from research that I did in Lisbon. And so for the book, which has taken me a long time, I sort of flipped that, you know, focusing more on the diaspora. But I knew that, you know, had this been my tenure book, there's no way. I mean, I don't think I could have actually written it this way. Like, I think that this was honestly a freedom that I had as a post-tenure, a scholar with tenure, at least at my own institution, to kind of write this way. Only because now, if I were in a department of anthropology, it might be different, but I'm a humanistic anthropologist by training. And I'm with a joint department with sociologists. And I think a lot of my sociologist colleagues viewed my early articles in the Journal of Religion in Africa, I mean, good journals, as anecdotal, You know, these stories and these, you know, voices you're including if you're informed, this is all anecdotal. Like, where are the numbers? Okay. So I had to tread very carefully. And I'm so glad that I did, because when I was able to get a Social Science Research Council book fellowship as a tenured scholar and really write this book the way I wanted to write this book, it was liberating. Oh my God, it was liberating, right? So I got to really tap into the training that I got at the University of Illinois with some humanistic anthropologists like Ed Brunner, who unfortunately passed away recently, Alma Gottlieb, who's still around, right? These big Africanists who write in very humanistic, person-centric ways, right? I've been inspired by Kiran Narayan, right? Paul Stoller's work, all of these folks. And so I felt like it was a real luxury, I guess is what I'm saying, right? It's my advocate for, like, boy, if you can wait to get that, you know, the 10-year books look a lot different from these kind of mid-career books, at least in my opinion. Okay, so I hope that answers the first part of the question. Second part of the question about true Islam, African custom, and Al-Hajj Fodimai Toure, yeah, wow. Al-Hajj Fodimai Toure was like a waliu, a saint, like a Muslim saint in his own right, you know, in Guinea-Bissau. And he was known, you know, there were a handful of these people who were really known, you know, and people would come, you know, Bafata Oyo was a huge pilgrimage site to which 3,000 pilgrims a year used to journey to receive blessings, dua from him. And I remember in the village, people would say to me, oh, Fatimata, you know, Al-Hajj Fodimai is not just a saint in Guinea-Bissau, like this guy is known around the world. They said, you know, he's been to Mecca, he's made the Mecca pilgrimage, which was a big deal. Only 3 people in the village at the time of my research had done that. One woman, actually, his wife, one of his wives. But they said, you know, people come from France, people come from Portugal, you know, to see him. People come from the whole Senegambia. There were pilgrims as far as Mali coming to see him. And the most interesting comment I ever got from this, Brian, from the people there were, when Al-Hajj Fodimai Toure goes to Senegal, right, for Touba, to the Touba, you know, the Amadou Bamba celebrations, right, the pilgrimage to Touba, the city of Touba parts for him. That's what they said to me. Okay, so like, you know, in a way they were sort of elevating him to the status of like Amadou Bamba, right? Which, you know, was just amazing. And in his death, you know, I don't know if you've been to this region, but, you know, you hear, you know, there is now I mean, dare I say this, my gosh, to a Muslim audience, right? A shrine dedicated to him, to where people come and make those very same dua, those, you know, offerings to him, or these you know, asking, right, things to him in his death. So as a saint, he is still, you know, giving people, right, answering their prayers for things like whatever you want, right, whether it's children or a good job or money or, you know, luck in life, a visa to go to Portugal. All right. He, you know, so the place is still a regional pilgrimage site, even though his brother has taken over, right? But it's still really to Al-Hajj Fodimai. So I think that you're right. You know, that diasporic identity is not just something that was happening in the diaspora, you know, in the contemporary diaspora in Lisbon. This was already happening in the Senegambia, and I argue, as you know in the book, that it just basically has intensified. Right, it's intensified in the diaspora, right? But this was something that, you know, that first year that I worked in Guinea-Bissau, this would have been the argument, and it kind of was the argument of some of my earlier work, right? This was happening, it was just slower to start, and it just is intensified in Lisbon. So I hope that answers your questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. Are there more things in the chat, or was that?
Yes, there are 2 more questions in the chat. Zachariah, how would you like to proceed? We've got about 2 minutes. I think you're muted, Zachariah.
So yes, I would like to, for David Owen and Tim White, to ask their question briefly and orally, please, because we don't have time to read all the long questions you asked. So please go ahead, David.
I don't know how adequate my audio will be here, but I'll try to just ask. Okay, fantastic, great. So thank you so much for this unique set of perspectives from West Africa, especially Lusophone West Africa and its diaspora. I'm curious about the languages or linguistic registers of the transmission of Islamic knowledge in the area that you've been observing, or the areas. And I'm wondering how you would characterize the interplay between these different languages that are used. And I'm curious if you've been able to observe Ajami writing playing a role in the transmission of Islamic knowledge in either or in any of these fora you've been looking at. And I'm especially interested in the role, if any, that you've been able to observe for Creole in Guinea-Bissau, of course, first and foremost. What is the role that Creole is playing in the transmission of Islamic knowledge? Is it a means of delivery or of dialectic? And then finally, what happens when we shift to the Portuguese context? There's been a lot of work on what happens with the Cabo Verdean diaspora, right? But what happens to the Bissauan or the Guinea-Bissauan diaspora in terms of their religious life, their transmission of Islamic knowledge? What happens to Creole in context?
Okay, so are you talking about Creole, the language Creole, or are you talking about Creole peoples? You sort of cut out a bit at one of those.
Yeah, I'm speaking about the language here, not about the,
great.
the social
Okay,
designation.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so boy, the language, yeah, this was a big challenge, right? Because the language complexity is it's very complex, right? So, in terms of transmission, right, for Islam, it's Arabic. I mean, these guys, both in Guinea-Bissau, they're studying the Quran all in Arabic. But once you get to the diaspora, right, and then themselves, right, in the village, it was all Mandinga, right? Very few people in the village of Bafatoyo spoke Creole. So I learned Creole when I was in Bissau, and, didn't really speak it much up country in Bafatoyo, right? So you've got people studying the Quran, of course, in Arabic. You've got some of these groups of sort of, reformist Muslims coming in and trying to bring translations and things, but they were pretty resistant to that. It's like, no, this has to happen. Yet what was so interesting is the head of the Quranic school in the village Quranic school actually was said to have drunk liquid medicine from his father. So he was 7 years old, the boy who taught the Quranic school in the village. And he drank liquid medicine and had the entire Quran memorized and could recite the entire Quran. So there was a lot of magicality of transmission and whatnot. When you got to Lisbon, this whole dynamic really shifted, and it was like, which healers, in fact, there's a whole section in the book with the healer debates, right? That it's about language, about Arabic. Who really knows Arabic and who doesn't, okay? It's really, people were photocopying, healers were said to have photocopied medicines to put into, so you had those who did that versus the people who actually know the Arabic, who were writing down the correct medicines and putting them in amulets. So there was a real sort of, my Arabic is better than your Arabic kind of thing going on, right? Some people had gone to the Middle East for pilgrimage or for Quranic study, and these were younger healers who really spoke Arabic and classical Arabic, Quranic, it was impeccable, right? And then you had people like my own master from Kolda who was teaching my husband and me in Lisbon, literally just like we would be learning in Guinea-Bissau, the memorization of the first this taking literally, 4 weeks to learn just that one surah, and memorizing it and then writing it. And then when I brought that to friends back here who are Arabic speakers, they couldn't even recognize it. Okay, so it was Arabic language is a huge marker for who really has it and who really doesn't. Okay, Creole playing? No, I can't say it's really playing a role, right? in Quranic knowledge transmission. Of course, it is now, I will say, the primary language in which I communicate now with all of my informants, Mandinga, because, you know, even Mandinga speakers in Lisbon, it's like, I can only go so far with my Mandinga. Like I can talk about taking the goats out and doing this and that, going to mosque. But the minute I start talking about, you know, stuff in Lisbon, the metro and cell phones, and it gets complicated, and you have to throw in so many Creole words anyway, right? So I would say that is shifting, but I think that the real energy of your question is that Arabic language and the role that that's played, and that is changing in the diaspora. Did that answer your question? Great, thanks.
Yeah, I think his question also has an element whether there is African languages written in Arabic transcripts.
Oh, yeah.
That was the question about Ajami. But
Okay.
we have to, you can't answer all the questions, but we're already so grateful that your presentation sparked such a rich and multi-layered discussion, but we have to stop there. And for those who want to learn more, I invite them to pick up the book. Right? Okay, so I wanted to plug the book there. Now I have to thank you, Michelle Johnson, for your presentation, and thank the audience for its engagement with your work. And we are going to stop our ISITA dialogue now, but we are going to resume in the fall. So stay tuned for more information about our programming moving forward. On that note, thank you to everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Fantastic.
You can